Everything you've been told about death is wrong. It's not an ending, not a void, not a mystery left to faith or speculation. For over 1,000 years, hidden within a forbidden manuscript lies a roadmap, one that details exactly what happens in the first 49 days after death. This text is known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo. It describes the moment the soul leaves the body, the visions it encounters, and what determines whether this is your final incarnation or just another turn in the endless cycle. But there is another voice, modern, clear, equally profound. In the 20th century, American author Neale Donald Walsch began a series of inner dialogues, written and published under the title Conversations with God. These books reshaped how millions of people view God, the soul, life, and death. Their central message is simple. Everything that happens to you, you are creating yourself, including what comes after your final breath. Death does not judge you, it only reveals who you are. In this video, we combine the ancient wisdom of the Tibetan masters with the divine insights of Conversations with God to show you what truly happens after death, why almost no one is prepared for it, and how you can break free from the cycle if you begin preparing right now. The truth about death has been hidden from you. This ancient text, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, was once reserved only for the most enlightened minds, for those who could grasp its truth without fear. It reveals that the moment of death is not the final breath. It is the beginning of a test that determines whether you break free from the cycle of life and death or fall back into reincarnation. But here's something even more radical. According to Conversations with God, this test is not imposed on you. You set it up yourself. You are choosing everything, even what appears as suffering, as death, as limitation. You choose it not as punishment, but as process. CWG, Book 2. And so, while the Tibetan teachings speak of liberation through clarity and detachment, God tells us, you are never trapped. You are remembering yourself, life after life, until you choose differently. Blind and unprepared, most people fail. Not because they are weak, but because they are unaware. They don't recognize what's happening. They don't see the illusions. They don't realize that everything they feel, see, and hear after death is a projection of their own mind. The Tibetan Book of the Dead says this clearly, and Conversations with God agrees, but deepens the meaning. The afterlife is not a place of judgment. It is a place of creation, just like life. Your soul creates what it expects, what it fears, and what it still holds on to. CWG, Book 3. And by the time most realize this, it's too late. If this manuscript is true, then the first moments after death are more important than the entire life you've just lived. And it all begins with one crucial moment. The moment you leave your body behind. The moment you die. But reality doesn't stop. You don't simply disappear. Instead, something else takes over. Something ancient texts have described for over 1,000 years. The first moments after death, the clear light. You will feel weightless, detached, as if waking from a dream that lasted your whole life. There will be no more heartbeat, no more breath, and yet you will still be aware. You will know that something has changed, but your mind, trained to believe that death is the end, will struggle to accept what it sees. Death is not the end of awareness, it is the expansion of it, says God in Conversations with God. It is the moment your soul steps out of the costume it wore and remembers the stage it stood upon. CWG, Book 1. If you've ever had an out-of-body experience, this moment will feel eerily familiar, except this time, there's no coming back. And then, it happens. A blinding, radiant light, so powerful, so overwhelming, that your very sense of identity begins to dissolve. This is what the Tibetan Book of the Dead calls the clear light of reality, the purest essence of consciousness. It is not a being, not a location, not a tunnel. It is you, unfiltered. It is God, unseparated. And Conversations with God fully confirms this. The light you meet is not something outside you. It is you, the part of yourself you forgot while living inside limitation. CWG, Book 2. If you recognize this light, if you surrender to it completely, you will merge with it. You will transcend the cycle of birth and death. You will achieve instant enlightenment. You will escape reincarnation forever. This is the ultimate moment of liberation, and it happens the instant you die, but almost no one recognizes it. Why? Because we are conditioned to fear the unknown, to cling to form, to resist surrender. The soul panics, clings to its memories, its identity, its unfinished desires. You fear becoming nothing because you believe you were something. But the truth is, you were always everything. You just forgot, as God reminds. CWG, Book 3. And so, instead of embracing the light, the soul recoils. And the moment fear takes over, the illusions begin. You start to hear sounds, whispers, echoes of voices that feel familiar, but warped, as if calling from behind a veil. The world around you begins to shift, and instead of light, you begin to see forms, patterns, shadows, flickers of places you once knew, faces that feel known, moments that tug on your memory, but none of it is real. Not yet. The mind is grasping, searching for meaning, and in doing so, it begins to create. The soul creates its after-death experience exactly as it created its life, through expectation, belief, memory, and desire, God says. CWG, Book 2. This is the beginning of the soul's personal dream, a dream so vivid it becomes indistinguishable from reality, a dream shaped not by freedom, but by fear. And here, most souls lose their way. The illusions begin. Instead of recognizing death as an opportunity for liberation, most souls fall into confusion. They seek comfort in familiarity, and the mind obliges. It projects the world they once knew, recreating familiar settings, faces, voices. Some even see religious figures they worshipped in life, a Christ, a Buddha, a saint in golden robes, not realizing these too are just manifestations of their own subconscious beliefs. You will see what you believe, says God in Conversations with God. Even after death, your mind will create gods that look like your gods, judges that sound like your judges, until you are ready to stop believing and start knowing. CWG, Book 2. If only they knew the truth, that none of it is real, that they are being gently tested, they could let go. But instead, they follow the visions deeper, into the Bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. The first few moments after death are the most important. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that awareness is the key, that those who have prepared for this moment can pass through the illusions and break free. But for the unprepared, for those still clinging to their past lives, what comes next is unavoidable. They will move through the 49-day journey, experiencing visions that will either guide them toward enlightenment or trap them in yet another cycle of rebirth. There is no punishment in the afterlife, only reflection, and most people are terrified of their own reflection, says God. CWG, Book 3. What the Book of the Dead describes as a test, God describes as a choice. You are not sent back. You choose to return, not consciously, but energetically. The vibration of your unresolved being draws you back. CWG, Book 2. The next phase of the journey is about to begin. But before we go deeper, remember this. These illusions are not punishment. They are mirrors. Mirrors made of thought, memory, and fear. They don't deceive you. You deceive yourself. The Bardo begins. You are now in the Bardo, the space between life and the next existence. Time no longer flows the way it did when you were alive. Seconds stretch into eternity, yet days can pass in an instant. You have no body, no voice, only awareness. But here's the problem. Most people don't realize they have died. They are trapped in a dreamlike state, clinging to the echoes of their past life, unable to accept that everything they once knew is gone. Death does not change you, it simply reveals you, says God. CWG, Book 1. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the Bardo as a shifting, unstable realm, a place where reality bends and distorts, where thoughts become things, and where the mind itself creates the experience. Every fear, every desire, every hidden emotion that was buried in life now takes form. In Conversations with God, this is described in a strikingly similar way, but with an emphasis on personal responsibility. In death, as in life, your thought is creative. You will see what you believe and believe what you see until you finally see through it. CWG, Book 3. The journey through this realm lasts exactly 49 days, a process that unfolds in stages, and for most, it is terrifying. In the beginning, there is confusion. The soul tries to return home, to its family, its loved ones. It lingers around familiar places, tries to speak, to be seen, but no one responds, no one hears, and slowly, the realization begins to sink in. This is not a dream. This is death. You are not being punished by being invisible. You are being reminded that you were never your form. CWG, Book 2. Even then, the mind resists. It clings to its identity, refuses to accept the inevitable. It seeks comfort, logic, explanations, anything to hold on to. But the Bardo does not provide comfort. It is not a place of rest. It is a place of transition, where the soul must confront itself in its purest form. The illusions of fear, and the trap you created yourself. At first, the experience is neutral, even peaceful. There is no physical pain, no suffering, only awareness. Some describe this stage as floating through a vast open space, a formless void where thoughts ripple out like waves in an infinite ocean. This is still a grace, a quiet before the storm. But the storm comes, and it is made from within. Visions of light and the moment of truth. Slowly, visions begin to emerge. The first are gentle, welcoming, beautiful, radiant beings appear, what some may interpret as angels, enlightened masters, or divine guides. These figures emanate warmth, wisdom, and an overwhelming sense of peace. They offer a way out, a path to transcendence, but the soul must recognize them for what they are, reflections of its own higher consciousness. There are no messengers in the afterlife, only mirrors, says God in Conversations with God. You will see the highest version of yourself, and it may appear as someone you once revered, but that being is you. CWG, Book 2. If the soul understands this, if it surrenders without fear, it can merge with these forms, dissolving into higher awareness, escaping the cycle of reincarnation forever. But most don't. They hesitate, they doubt, and hesitation is all it takes. The radiant beings begin to shift, their light flickers, their forms grow less stable, the once soothing voices become whispers of doubt, and then the shadows begin. This is the turning point. You are either ascending into remembrance or descending into projection, says God. CWG, Book 3. The peaceful forms grow distorted, their faces twist. What was once a divine presence now seems threatening. But these terrifying figures, they are not demons, they are not punishments. They are projections of the soul's own mind, its regrets, its hidden guilt, its unprocessed fear. The Tibetan Book of the Dead warns, everything experienced in the Bardo is a reflection of one's own consciousness. It is not an external judgment, but an internal confrontation. Conversations with God adds compassion to this. No one is judging you but yourself, and even then, only to the degree that you still believe in judgment. CWG, Book 1. This is where the journey becomes dangerous, because the more fear takes hold, the stronger the illusions become. The Bardo is not just a place of transition, it is a mirror, and for most, that reflection is unbearable. At first, the visions feel divine. The soul sees celestial landscapes, radiant light, and beings of pure compassion. These luminous figures do not speak with words, but their presence radiates an overwhelming sense of peace. Some who experience near-death states describe them as angels, masters, or even gods. But in truth, they are neither saviors nor judges. They are manifestations of the soul's own highest potential, reflections of the light it still carries. When you meet God after death, you do not meet an entity. You meet the part of yourself that knows itself as God, says God in Conversations with God. CWG, Book 3. If the soul recognizes them, it can transcend. But recognition requires clarity, and clarity is difficult when the mind is clouded by fear. For those who spent their lives chasing desires, fearing death, or clinging to identity, the illusions begin to distort. The radiant beings remain, but their forms begin to shift. The soul sees them flicker, twisting in and out of shapes, as if reality itself is starting to unravel. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they begin to fade, and in their place, the wrathful visions emerge. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this moment in disturbing detail. As the days pass in the Bardo, the comforting figures vanish, replaced by monstrous entities. These beings are terrifying beyond anything the soul has ever known. They roar with inhuman voices, their faces twisted in expressions of rage and chaos. Some have multiple heads, countless arms, eyes that burn like fire. They appear as demons, executioners, relentless pursuers, and they strike fear into the heart of the unprepared soul. This is where most souls panic. They run, they plead, they scream. But there is no escape, because there is nothing to escape from. There is no devil but the one you imagine, no hell but the one you build, and no punishment but your own belief in it, says God. CWG, Book 1. These terrifying figures are not real enemies. They do not exist outside the mind. They are projections of the soul's own unresolved fears, its hidden guilt, its buried regrets. Every moment of deception, cruelty, or selfishness from the past life takes form in the Bardo, appearing as something external, something attacking. But the attack is self-created, the horror is self-inflicted, and the most dangerous part, the more the soul fights, the stronger the visions become. Fear fuels the illusion. Terror gives it power. The only way to escape is not to run, but to recognize. Those who realize the truth, who understand that these entities are nothing more than shadows of the mind, watch them dissolve instantly, like mist burned away by the sun. The illusions vanish the moment the soul stops believing in them. The moment you stop fearing what is not real, it becomes clear that it never was, says God. CWG, Book 2. But almost no one understands this in time. They see only the nightmare, not the lesson hidden within it. This is the second major test of the afterlife. The first was recognizing the clear light, a test of awareness. The second is recognizing the illusions of fear, a test of self-mastery. Those who fail this test are dragged further into the Bardo, descending deeper into the cycle of karma, unable to break free. Attaining the truth, the Great Life Review. For the majority, the terror lasts weeks. The Book of the Dead states that by the third or fourth week in the Bardo, the soul reaches its next challenge, a full review of its past life. And this time, there is nowhere to hide. There is no judge, no divine courtroom, no higher being deciding your fate. What happens next is far more profound and far more terrifying. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls it the Great Mirror, a moment when the soul is forced to confront the full weight of its existence. At first, it seems like nothing is happening. The wrathful illusions begin to fade, and for a moment, the soul feels as though it has escaped. But then, a new experience takes hold, more vivid, more intense than anything before. It is not a vision, It is not a dream. It is reliving. The soul is pulled backward through time, through every action, every thought, every emotion it ever created. But this is not memory. It is full immersion. The soul does not just recall what it did in life. It experiences it all over again. Every moment of kindness, every act of cruelty, every decision made in secret. Now, fully felt, not only from its own perspective, but from the perspective of everyone it ever affected. You will experience the totality of who you were, and not only what you felt, but what others felt because of you, says God. CWG, Book 2. If you caused pain, you will feel that pain. If you brought joy, you will feel that joy. But there is no filter, no way to justify or excuse your choices. Everything is raw, immediate, undeniable. This is not punishment, it is the truth. And that's what makes it unbearable for most. The soul is not being judged by some external force. It is judging itself, silently, honestly, totally. Conversations with God explains it this way. There is no one condemning you. You are simply standing in the light of your own clarity and seeing at last what you could not see in life. CWG, Book 1. For many, this experience is agonizing, because we spend our lives avoiding responsibility, justifying mistakes, burying guilt, blaming others. But in death, there is no one left to blame. You do not get to explain why you acted the way you did. You do not get to argue, deflect, rationalize. You only get to feel. For some, this experience is blissful. Those who lived with compassion, honesty, and wisdom are flooded with peace, as every positive action returns to them like waves of light. But for others, it is a torment beyond imagining. Not because they are punished, but because the weight of their own actions crashes down upon them. You will not be punished for your sins. You will simply understand them, says God. CWG, Book 2. This is the reckoning, and it is unavoidable. The consequences of choice and the return. But here's where it gets even more shocking. According to Tibetan teachings, this life review does not only affect the past, it also determines the future. By the time the soul has relived its entire existence, it is no longer neutral. It is deeply conditioned by the emotions it has just re-experienced. If the soul emerges from this review filled with guilt, regret, or attachment, it will be drawn back into the cycle of reincarnation. The heavier the burden, the lower the realm it will return to. Some are reborn into suffering, into poverty, into struggle, not because of some divine judgment, but because their own mind state pulls them toward it. The soul is choosing without realizing it. You are always choosing, even when you think you are not. Your vibration makes the choice for you, says God in Conversations with God. CWG, Book 2. This is why the life review is not just a reflection. It is a test to see if the soul can let go of regret, let go of shame, let go of fear, let go of all the unfinished desires that still tie it to what was. Those who pass the test move toward liberation. Those who fail are pulled back into another life, another body, another cycle of forgetting. The Tibetan Book of the Dead warns, those who cannot release their attachments will re-enter the womb as if falling into sleep. And Conversations with God unfolds the same truth, in an even more personal light. The soul is not sent anywhere. It goes where it must, to become what it is still choosing to be. CWG, Book 3. This is why spiritual traditions emphasize preparing for death long before it arrives. Because when the moment comes, when the great mirror is placed in front of you, what you see is no longer within your control. It has already been written by the life you lived, and by the 4th or 5th week in the Bardo, the final test begins. The soul now faces its ultimate choice, to break free or to be reborn. The final choice, liberation or return. The Bardo is almost over. The illusions have played their tricks. The soul has faced its past, relived every joy, every sorrow, every hidden thought that shaped its existence. Now, After weeks of drifting through the in-between, the moment of decision arrives. This is the final test, the one that determines everything. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this stage is described as the most crucial and most difficult of all. The soul now stands at a crossroads. It must make a choice, either recognize the illusions and break free forever, or give in to desire and fall back into the cycle of reincarnation. But here's the trap. Most souls don't even realize they're making a choice. By this point, the illusions have become so overwhelming, so convincing, that the soul barely remembers it is in the Bardo at all. The visions now take on a new form, different from everything that came before. They are no longer monstrous, no longer divine. They are familiar, comforting, even tempting. The final trap is always love mistaken as longing, says God in Conversations with God. CWG, Book 3. The Book of the Dead warns, in these final days, the soul will be offered a way out, but it is a trap. It sees visions of loved ones calling it back. Familiar places appear, drawing it in with warmth and nostalgia. The soul feels a deep longing, a pull towards something it once called home. But these aren't real memories. They are not salvation. They are projections, reflections of desire, not destiny. These are glimpses of the next life the soul is about to enter. The karmic forces have already begun shaping the next incarnation, weaving the emotional threads of return. If the soul clings to these visions, if it allows itself to be pulled in, it is instantly swept into a new body, a new life, another cycle of forgetting. Reincarnation is not forced. It is simply the most likely outcome when the soul is not yet ready to remember, says God. CWG, Book 2. Rebirth happens instantly. The process is automatic. The moment the soul latches onto a desire, a fear, or an attachment, it is pulled into a new womb, a new reality, with no memory of the choice it just made. The Book of the Dead describes this as falling into unconsciousness, a moment of deep forgetfulness where the past life dissolves and a new one begins. It is as if waking from a dream with no recollection of where you just came from. And so, the cycle begins again. Birth, suffering, death, return. But for the few who are prepared, the final test is different. Those who understand what is happening see through the illusion. They recognize the visions as mere projections, tricks of the mind designed to keep them trapped. They do not cling to the comfort of past attachments. They do not recoil in fear. They remain still, aware, detached. And in that moment, something incredible happens. The illusions collapse. The karmic forces lose their grip. The pull toward rebirth fades. And the soul, free from attachment, free from fear, transcends the cycle completely. Liberation is not granted. It is remembered. You simply step into what has always been yours, says God. CWG, Book 3. This is what the Tibetan masters call liberation. It is not a place, not a heaven, not an afterlife in the way most imagine. It is awakening to what was always there, a state beyond illusion, beyond duality, beyond suffering. But almost no one reaches this state, because to do so requires something most never prepare for: awareness at the moment of death, the ability to recognize the trap before it closes. You do not need to run from death. You need to arrive at it, awake, says God. CWG, Book 1. And this is why, for over 1,000 years, these teachings were hidden. Because if people understood the truth about death, it would change everything. Why this knowledge was hidden for over 1,000 years? For centuries, for over 1,000 years, these teachings were locked away, reserved for only the most advanced spiritual practitioners, hidden from the masses, censored by religious institutions. Even today, most people have never heard of them, and there's a reason for that. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was never meant for the ordinary mind. It was considered too powerful, too dangerous for those who were unprepared. Because if people truly understood what happens after death, it would shatter everything: their beliefs, their fears, their entire perception of reality. When you remove fear from death, you remove control from life, says God in Conversations with God, CWG, Book 2. Think about it. If death is not an end, if it is not a punishment, if there is no divine judgment, then what happens to the control systems built on those very ideas? Religions would crumble, governments would lose power, society, as we know it, would unravel. For centuries, religious institutions have preached about heaven and hell, about divine punishment, about the need to obey higher authorities to secure a place in the afterlife. But these narratives served one purpose: control. You have been taught that God is a ruler, that death is a judgment, and that obedience is salvation. None of this is true, says God, CWG, Book 1. Because if people believe that an external force dictates their fate after death, they will follow, they will conform, they will fear. But what if the truth is that no one is judging you but yourself? That the afterlife is not about punishment or reward, but simply your own mind reflecting back at you? This knowledge was kept hidden because it would destroy the idea that salvation comes from an external source. It would force people to accept something much more terrifying and much more liberating, that they are fully responsible for their own fate. The most freeing and the most frightening truth is that there is no one else to blame, says God, CWG, Book 2. And that's not all. Modern science is beginning to confirm aspects of these ancient teachings. Near-death experiences, NDEs, are filled with eerily similar descriptions. People report seeing the clear light, encountering their life review, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace or fear depending on how they lived. Even cutting-edge quantum physics is beginning to suggest that consciousness is not confined to the brain, that it may persist beyond death, that it may operate outside the limits of time and space. For centuries, this knowledge was dismissed as superstition. But now, the lines between ancient wisdom and modern science are starting to blur. So why don't more people know about this? Because the system is designed to keep you distracted, to keep you focused on the material world, on temporary pleasures, on meaningless fears, to keep you chasing money, status, validation, so that by the time death arrives, you are completely unprepared. A society that does not want you to awaken will sell you distractions and call it life, says God, CWG, Book 3. The biggest lie ever told about death is that it's a mystery. It's not. The Tibetan masters mapped it out over 1,000 years ago. They understood that the first 49 days after death follow a precise structure, that the mind shapes its own afterlife, that awareness is the only key to freedom, and yet almost no one is preparing for it. Because the real secret is this: if you are not conscious in life, you will not be conscious in death, and that means the cycle will repeat, over and over again. But for those who understand the truth, for those who begin preparing now, there is another way. We are already in the Bardo and don't know it. If the Tibetan Book of the Dead is right, then most of us are already doomed to repeat the cycle. Not because we are weak, not because we are unworthy, but because we are completely unprepared. Look around. How many people spend their lives even thinking about death, let alone preparing for it? Society has conditioned us to fear it, ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist. We distract ourselves with work, entertainment, money, temporary pleasures, all while knowing, consciously or not, that one day our time will come. And when it does, we will be as lost as the billions before us, blinded, confused, caught in the same trap. You think the test happens at death, but it's happening now. This, right now, is the afterlife you are shaping, says God in Conversations with God, CWG, Book 2. Because the real test doesn't happen after death. It's happening right now. The Bardo is not just a place in the afterlife. It is a state of mind. The same illusions that deceive the soul in death are already deceiving us in life. The fear that keeps souls running from the wrathful visions, It's the same fear that keeps people silent, obedient, numb every day. The attachment that pulls souls back into reincarnation. It's the same attachment that keeps people chasing money, fame, and the illusion of permanent happiness through impermanent things. The inability to recognize illusions. It's the same blindness that keeps people believing everything they are told, never questioning the reality in front of them. Death doesn't bring clarity. It magnifies what you were already believing. If you lived asleep, you will die in the same dream, says God. CWG, Book 3. If you are not conscious now, you will not be conscious after death. And this is why so few people escape. The Book of the Dead teaches the same habits, fears, and desires that shape our daily lives also shape what happens after we die. Those who live in ignorance die in ignorance. Those who are controlled by fear in life will be controlled by fear in death, and those who chase illusions while alive will continue chasing them after their body is gone. The cycle is relentless, perfectly designed to keep us trapped. And the worst part? We are doing it to ourselves. You are not being punished, you are simply experiencing yourself, says God. CWG, Book 1. But here's the truth most will never understand. The cycle is not unbreakable. The Tibetan masters left behind these teachings for a reason, so that the few who are ready can wake up. And the first step is to see reality for what it really is. How to prepare for death before it arrives. Preparation does not happen after death. It happens while you are still here. And that preparation is not about religion, not about dogma, not about rituals. It is about awareness, about seeing the illusions for what they are, about breaking free from the fears, the desires, the false identities that keep us trapped. You cannot die peacefully if you have never lived consciously, says God in Conversations with God. CWG, Book 2. Because the question is no longer, what happens after death? The real question is, are we already dead? Most people will move on and forget what they've just learned. They'll return to their distractions, their routines, their programmed existence. But the few who understand will know this moment is a turning point. Now the question becomes urgent. If the way we live determines what happens when we die, then how do we prepare? How do we escape the cycle before it's too late? The answer is simpler than you think. If death is a test, then life is the study guide. CWG, Book 1. But the problem is, most people don't even know they're being tested. They live as if life is endless, as if death is some distant event that won't come for a long time. And then, one day, it does. The Tibetan masters taught, the only way to be conscious in death is to be conscious in life. So what does that mean? It means you must begin preparing now. And that preparation comes in 3 stages. 1. Detachment. Letting go of what holds you back. Not in the sense of rejecting life, but in the sense of not being controlled by it. Most people are enslaved by their desires. They chase money, validation, status, relationships, thinking these things will bring happiness. But in the Bardo, none of it matters. The only thing that determines your fate is the state of your consciousness. You cannot hold on to anything in death, because nothing was ever yours, says God. CWG, Book 2. The more attached you are to the material world, the harder it will be to let go. And the harder it is to let go, the more likely you are to be reborn into another life of struggle. Detachment does not mean giving up everything and living in isolation. It means mastering your mind, learning to control your thoughts, instead of letting them control you. It means understanding that nothing in this world is permanent, not your body, not your possessions, not even your identity. Once you truly grasp this, you will stop fearing death. 2. Awareness, clarity of perception. The Bardo is a realm of illusions, but so is life, right now. Everything you see, everything you believe, is a projection of your mind, shaped by conditioning, fear, and external influences. If you do not learn to see through the illusions now, you will not see through them in death. The veil you believe is over death is the same veil that covers your waking life, says God. CWG, Book 3. Meditation, self-inquiry, deep reflection, not as religious practice, but as training for the final test. In the same way an athlete trains the body before competition, the mind must be trained before it faces the afterlife. Because in that moment, your thoughts become your reality. If you have spent your life reacting with fear, doubt, and confusion, that is exactly what will consume you in death. But if you have spent your life cultivating clarity, presence, and detachment, then in the Bardo, you will recognize the illusions for what they are. You will not run, you will not cling, you will remain still, aware, free. 3. Acceptance, the highest maturity. Death is not something to fear, nor something to avoid thinking about. It is the most important moment of your existence, the moment when everything is revealed. If you live in fear of it, you will be ruled by fear in the afterlife. But if you embrace it as the natural transition that it is, you will approach it with peace instead of panic. The ancient masters spent their lives preparing for this moment, not because they were obsessed with death, but because they understood life and death are the same thing. One cannot be mastered without the other, and that is why modern society keeps people distracted, because a world full of people who do not fear death is a world full of people who cannot be controlled. He who does not fear the end cannot be manipulated at the beginning, says God. CWG, Book 1. If you understand this, you are already different from most. You are already waking up. The final truth about death, everything we've discussed, everything about the Bardo, about illusions, about liberation, it is all meaningless unless you understand this. Most people will never prepare for death. They will live their lives blindly, consumed by distractions, chasing illusions, fearing what they do not understand, and when the moment comes, they will be thrown into the Bardo, confused, lost, unprepared, just as they were in life. But here's the final truth. Death does not change you. It only reveals you. The Tibetan Book of the Dead does not describe an afterlife as a reward or a punishment. It does not promise paradise for the good or hell for the wicked. It does not place judgment on anyone. Because the Bardo is not an external place. It is the mirror of your own consciousness. When you die, you do not meet God. You meet yourself without the masks, says God in Conversations with God. CWG, Book 2. Everything you will experience after death, the clear light, the peaceful deities, the terrifying illusions, the life review, the pull toward reincarnation, it is all a reflection of the mind you carried in life. If you lived in fear, you will die in fear. If you lived in attachment, you will die clinging to what is already gone. If you lived unconscious, you will drift through the afterlife in the same way, reacting, grasping, forgetting, falling back into the cycle. But if you lived with awareness, if you trained your mind to see through illusion, if you prepared yourself while still alive, then in death, you will recognize the Bardo for what it is, a test, a transition, an opportunity. And that is the secret hidden for over 1,000 years. The reason these teachings were forbidden, because if people knew the truth, they would stop fearing death. They would stop wasting their lives on things that do not matter. They would stop being controlled by false beliefs, by religious institutions, by governments that use fear to keep them obedient. A person who understands death is a person who cannot be manipulated, says God. CWG, Book 1. Because once you see the truth, once you understand that this life is only preparation for the next, everything changes. The way you think changes. The way you act changes. You no longer chase temporary pleasures. You no longer fear loss, because you know nothing was ever yours to begin with. You no longer cling to identity, because you realize it was never real. And when the moment comes, when you take your last breath and cross the threshold, you will not panic. You will not grasp. You will not be pulled back into the cycle of forgetting. You will simply be aware. And in that awareness, you will have a choice, a real choice, to break free or to return. Freedom is not given. It is chosen by those who remember, says God. CWG, Book 3. Most will never reach this point. They will move on from this message, return to their routines, forget everything they have just learned. And when the moment comes, they will be unprepared. But you don't have to be. If you've made it this far, then you are already different from most. You are already seeking. And that means you are already remembering. Conclusion. Death does not erase you. It reveals you. And everything you've just heard is not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Because the journey doesn't begin when you die. It's already happening, right now. And the truth is this: if you are not conscious in life, you will not be conscious in death. The illusions that trap you after death are the same illusions that surround you today. The fears, the attachments, the beliefs you never questioned. You do not need to wait until your final breath to pass the test. You can start today by letting go of who you think you are, by seeing through the false stories you've been told, by remembering the soul beneath the noise. Both the Tibetan masters and the voice of God in conversations with God say the same thing. You are not here to suffer. You are here to awaken. And when you finally do, when you remember what you are, you will no longer fear death, because you will know that death is not the end. It is the moment you are called home.